Welcome everyone, this is Vintage Story, and in today's video we're going to be talking about food preservation. That's right. I always say that once you get used to Vintage Story and the survival mechanics, finding food is not the hard part. Preserving food is what becomes more difficult. So in this video, we're going to cover the vanilla methods of food preservation as well as a few of the modded options that are out there as well. So if you enjoy this, you find it useful, make sure you hit that like button. Also, check the pinned comment below because I've got a whole bunch of other tutorial videos for Vintage Story, and I hope you'll find at least one or two of them helpful. Now, let's get into food preservation. The main way of preserving food in the vanilla game of Vintage Story is to build yourself a cellar. And we're going to cover all the details of what makes a cellar, what can enhance or detract from its food preservation qualities. But first I want to give a quick shout out to the mod we're going to be referring to a little bit here in the video. It's not directly related to food preservation, but it is the Status HUD Continued mod. And we're going to be looking at two of the bits of information it presents with us. One is simply the temperature, and the other is this little icon right here, which we're going to discuss in one moment. But it's important to note this temperature reading is not an indoor temperature. And if we hit, our character screen, you can see it does basically correspond to this temperature here as well. That's the outdoor temperature, and that is what will affect the cellar. You cannot change the temperature of the room, at least unmodded as far as I know. So we're strictly talking about outdoor temperatures when regarding cellars preservation. But the Status HUD Continued is a client-side mod, meaning even if you're on a multiplayer server, you can just go ahead and install it and it will work for you. The server's administrator doesn't have to install it on the whole thing. So just a good mod. And this little icon here tells us that we are actually in a proper cellar. So it's very helpful. Kind of removes some of the guessing game. And you see, if I step out here into my hallway, there's no more icon because, of course, this is not a proper cellar. And we're going to cover the details of why it's not right now. The first factor you should consider when constructing your cellar is the dimensions of the room itself. A cellar can be no bigger than 7 by 7 by 7. So 7 wide, 7 tall, and 7 long. A perfect cube. It can be smaller than that, but not bigger. So that's very important to remember right off the bat. Now, the other two very critical factors in your cellar is the light levels and the temperature. As noted before, the outdoor temperature needs to be basically as low as you can get it. During the summer season, you're going to have less time with your foods than you will in winter. So that's one of the reasons we're going to discuss a mountain storage option later in the video. But for right now, let's also talk about the light. Now, I'm strictly talking about natural sunlight here. Artificial lights such as torches, oil lamps, and lanterns do not affect your food preservation. You're totally fine putting as many lanterns in here as you want. That will not hurt your food. But sunlight will, very much so, and doors are the main culprit of sunlight. So a perfect cellar is exactly what I'm standing in here, just a cube of stone with no entrance whatsoever. Now, normally you would achieve this probably by breaking the blocks and just replacing them each time you come and go. In fact, one of the best materials to do that with, especially early game, even before you've got a saw, are the hay bales, because these things break super quickly. Just in your hand alone, you don't need a tool, and they work as a wonderful door for an impromptu cellar. Even late game cellars, if you want to really reduce the sunlight, do what I've done here and completely seal it without a door whatsoever. Now, I'm using a teleporter that I can link to other teleporters. Of course, this is a mod here, the wonderful Translocator Relocator mod. And here you see we are back. Notice that the temperature too has gone up. because this location is actually on top of a mountain. That's right, it's completely sealed, so we can't go outside. But if we look at my map, yeah, you can see I came up here and literally constructed a stone cube to take advantage of the low temperatures. So if you want to further maximize your cellar, put it on top of a mountain. And one crucial point, which is, I think, a mistake a lot of people make, including myself early on, they don't need to be buried underground. Your cellar can be at the same level as your main building, just like mine is here. It, again, is all reliant on the light levels and the outdoor temperature. A couple final notes on food cellars before we move on to other food preservation methods. Wood is really the enemy of your food cellar. Now, a door is accepted. You could, if you really wanted, use an iron door, as I've got right here. This will work, and it will further reduce the amount of wood you need for your cellar. Even though it shows the window there, that won't affect it. Technically, this is still a solid door. Now, there are other door types, such as, I believe, the rustic door, which won't work. They will let more light through, so you really want to avoid those. But at the very worst, just use this type of solid door, and you should be good. And now that we are leaving the cellar, it's time to talk about the next method of food preservation: pickling vegetables and curing meats. So in order to do this, we're going to be using barrels, which of course are made of wood. So I like to take this kind of an operation out of my cellar and maybe build a secondary cellar. So this will definitely have less food preservation because of all the wood in here, but it's still going to give some of these items a bit of a boost. So I like to have separate rooms, plus it feels nice and cozy in here. But we're going to be focused on pickling and curing meat. And of course, I've got a setup here. Now, you can do this without water. We are going to be using water for the veggies, but let's start off with the meat first. So in order to cure meat, we need an empty barrel, as you can see we've got here. And of course, you're going to need salt. That's the real killer. And it's a real challenge to find this stuff. If you're using your Pro Pick, remember that salt comes up as halite in the reading. So you're really looking for a halite dome. And that's called that because typically when you find it, you will find enough to last you for your whole playthrough. So it's very rare, sometimes difficult to find, being just another white rock out there. But once you do get your hands on this salt, it really, really makes a lot of options in the game possible, including cheese. But let's stick to the meat for now. So if we open up the handbook and look at the meat, right here we see cured. It says 2 sprinkles of salt for 1 piece. So I will tell you right off the bat, this actually does use quite a bit of salt. I just put an entire stack of 50 salt, and you can see it automatically filters it in there. Now what we're going to do is just put in 25 pieces of meat. So we've got to count that down. There we go. Boom. Yeah, and you can see it's giving me the tool telling me the outcome. That way we know that I didn't put too much in there, you know. If I put that, 27 pieces, not quite enough salt. There we go. And you can't really fit any more in there, I believe. So this is the maximum that we can do. And of course, we seal it up. 20 days from now, we will have cured red meat. So we'll give that time, and we're going to talk about pickling vegetables next. Of course, using salt. And if we fill the bucket up with water, you can see I've already got one here. This contains 50 liters of brine. By doing this, it only requires 25 salts. So let's stack off a couple. And the wiki does say that you can do this without water, but I mean, with the vegetables, you can use this brine. So that's what I do. I don't think you can brine your meats, but let's test it. Just see. I'm pretty sure that's a no. Now, yeah, see, there's no output for that. But if we take 50 onions, oh yes, after 14 days, we will have pickled onions. Beautiful. And of course, not only does this extend the life of the vegetable, which you might say to yourself, well, vegetables already have kind of a nice long storage, so I don't want to waste it. Well, here's the deal. If you do plan on making cheese eventually, pickled vegetables are one of the requirements for cheese. But now that we've covered pickling and curing, let's get on to the next method of food preservation. All right, and now we come to the second method of preserving food. Very simple. We just cook it. That's right. So I've got a stack of fresh red meat here, but it's only good for another 23 hours. So let's go ahead and put it in our fire pit. We'll light this up, let it cook, and then we'll check and take a look at the timer. Okay, there we go. So we got a couple of pieces here, and boom, wow. So that's a big difference. Yeah, we went from, well, it was 24 hours in my hot bar to what appears to be a much, much longer time frame for sure, 73 days. Now, that is because the meat has been charred too. Now, that's apparently the only way that the fire pit can prepare it, but I think that we can also put it in our ovens, whether it's a modded oven like I've got here, or if it's the regular fire clay oven, you should be able to bake your meats as well. But cooking food, including in stews with porridge and veg, will extend that timer a bit, but just depending, you can even cook with partially spoiled foods if you're really desperate. But of course, that will lower the overall outcome too. The preservation of the final product will be reduced because of the ingredient spoilage factor. Now that we've got some food cooked up and we've extended the preservation timer on it a bit, we can pour it into some crock pots, which quite honestly won't help too much with the preservation alone, but there is a neat little trick we can do before we put them on the shelves in our cellar, and that is to take the fired crock, put it in your crafting grid along with either a lump of fat or a piece of beeswax, and then you can see if we take this out, down in the bottom it says that it is now sealed. And when I place this on the shelf and it begins its food preservation timer, it will be lasting much, much longer in this state than it would be if it wasn't sealed. And one final note about sealed crocks: when you take your bowl and dip your first serving out of it, that will break the seal, and the remaining servings are now back on their original timer. Imagine that winter is almost here and you just harvested the last year berry bushes, but you know that they're not going to last through the winter. They'll probably go bad before you can cook them all. So what do you do with your extra fruit? Well, you can press it into juice. So we're going to put our red currants right into the juicer. Of course, I just hold down my mouse button and that compresses it nicely. If we watch the tooltip at the top, it will count down the liters of red currant juice. Hopefully you've got a bucket in there so it won't just spill onto the floor. And once it's done, we'll disengage the fruit press. Now we get a little bit of mash for our troubles, which we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. But let's stay focused on the juice. So I can actually drink it straight out of the bucket like this. And of course, that will count towards my fruit nutrient there, which is a great way. And in juice form, it is definitely preserved for much longer than just the raw fruits, for 5 days and then 28 days, even in just my hot bar. Proper cellar would extend that even more, but there's still another few things we can do with the juice. If we pour it into a barrel, for one thing, that'll allow me to keep squeezing the rest of my fruits and we can accumulate large quantities. But once we get a full barrel, we can actually seal it and either turn it into vinegar for some other recipes or fruit wine, which will preserve it for even longer and have the side effect of getting you drunk. And you can even go farther with the wines and liquors and start distilling and stuff like that, but that's getting a bit beyond the scope of this video. Although don't forget about the fruit press when thinking of fruit preservation. And now for the final non-modded way of preserving food in Vintage Story, and that is of course to char it. This works for breads and pies and meat as well. So for the regular cooked red meat in my backpack, it's 20 days. Over here, it's 70 days for the same type of meat. And below, we've got regularly cooked rice bread for 30 days, 31. Over here, it's 70 days for the charred stuff. So it literally doubles it. And this is a great method of preserving your foods. It should be noted that it does decrease the satiety when you char your food. All right, now we're going to talk about some of the ways you can preserve food using mods. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover every mod out there, obviously, and many of these will probably change and stuff. And of course, Vintage Story itself is an early access game, and a lot of things will change as we go through new updates. In fact, I believe that smoking and drying meats is on the official roadmap. So one day, some of these modded things might become obsolete, but the first one we're going to talk about takes place first here in our blacksmith, believe it or not. So we're going to be making some drying hooks. And like I said, our first stage requires making large hook molds, which as long as you've got a culinary artillery installed, these should be available in your pottery menu, and after firing them in a pit kiln, you can fill them up with basically any kind of metal, but I would go with copper. The type doesn't affect the outcome of the drying, so just do copper and save yourself, the good stuff, unless you really want to go with like a nice bronze just for the look. But now, once you've got your hooks, let's look at how you use them. Alright, and to test out the hooks here, we are back in my cellar because they do require a cold and dry area, preferably sealed in stone. So the roof of your cellar really is the best place for them. But let's go ahead and craft up. I've got a few hooks here and some boards. Really simple and easy recipe right there. And let's just take a look at it so you can see the requirements. There it is. Yeah, and we're going to grab these, put them in the hot bar. We will immediately hang it there. And I can put just regular old red meat or bush meat, hang it up there like that in the cuts. This will eventually dry age the meat, and it will extend the lifetime of it. And in order to utilize the dry age stuff, you simply remove it from the hooks, and you have to put it in your crafting grid with a knife to remove like the outer layers, but then you should have some usable meat. But you can also hang sausage up here, and this is going to keep your meat preserved for much longer than just drying it. So that's the next method we're going to use for preserving meat, is making sausage. All right, looks like sausage is on the menu, and this recipe really will preserve your meat quite a long time, especially if you hang them on those hooks that we just took a look at. But this is brought to us by two mods, Expanded Foods and a Culinary Artillery, and those two really go hand in hand. I personally don't see much point in playing with one without the other, but now let's make some sausage. So we're going to be using 3 ingredients, but one of them is optional. First things first, we got to prepare the meat. So we are going to need a rolling pin and a knife. Okay, now we'll take just regular raw red meat. Bushmeat will work for this too, in fact, I should note that, but of course it has less satiety, so we won't worry about that. And you can see with the steel rolling pin and the meat, we can make smashed red meat. Now that's just the first step. We want to take that red meat, put it right back into the crafting grid with the knife. That gives us red meat nuggets. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. So we'll put those in our hotbar, and we're ready to make our first batch of sausage. Now I'm able to do 12 at once. I think vanilla you can only do 6, but no worries, no worries. It's the same basic recipe. The downside to this is it does take a lot of fat, but I happen to have a lot of fat. So you can see that with just these 2 basic things, the mixing bowl will produce some sausage links for us. Really, really handy. And let's let it do 1. Boom, there we go. Now this is raw, so I could put this in my oven and cook it up and stuff, even char it to preserve it longer. Or we can toss in some salt, and that will make cured meat very, very nice. In addition, you can also put cheese in your sausage too, but I don't think that offers much in terms of preservation. It just fills out that dairy nutrient. All right, let's hang up that sausage, and if we take a look at the timer, it says it's fresh for 317 days. and it still has 12 days to dry. So once it dries, it will further increase the timer. And we look at some of the cured sausage I've got up here. This stuff's actually good for 40 years. So sausage coupled with these meat hooks is a really great way to do things. And of course, there are other great recipes thanks to the expanded foods such as pemmican. Here we go. That's the list of pemmican. It's a fairly simple recipe, which again does require the mixing bowl, and it's baked in an oven so you can actually char it and get even more life out of it. This will also allow you to mix in some fruit with it. Let's take a look at hardtack. Here we go. So inside the handbook, there's also entries for what is essentially a really dried out cracker. You can think of that if you're not familiar with what hardtack is. But again, this could be charred to further increase its shelf life. And it's a very simple recipe. Does require salt though, so keep that in mind. But I'll tell you, the expanded foods in a culinary artillery really are great, but there's one thing that they do lack, and you might have thought of it already. What about smoking your meat? Now let's take a look at that. Up to this point, all the modded methods of food preservation that we've talked about have been from expanded foods and a culinary artillery, two of my favorites. But I am also aware of one from the primitive survival mod, which we're going to talk about now. And of course, there's probably many others, but like I said, I can't really cover them all today. That video would be hours and hours long, but I would love to hear your favorite modded methods of food preservation, so let me know down in the comment section for sure. But here we are looking at some smokers, and surprisingly easy recipe. There it is. Let's click on it. Yeah, just some boards and some cobblestone of whatever you'd like. And you get these little, what look like almost birdhouses, but put some firewood inside. Now, you can't just hang the regular meat in there. What you need to do is put your raw meat in a crafting grid with some flax twine, and that gives us trussed meat, again, from the primitive survival. And I'm going to take those 6 bundles. Now you can see them going in there. Of course, I'm going to have to get some more twine to fill these all up, but let's go ahead and close that one up, and we'll light that little bit of wood down there below until the smoker lights up. There it goes. And you can see it's got a 0% complete, so we can check it. It really doesn't take that long either. So let's fast forward, take a look at what the smoked meat offers. And the smoker is complete. Let's go ahead and grab the meat out of there. Okay, perishable for 37 days, next to, of course, only 17 hours there for the raw stuff. And that's definitely going to be more than what it would if we just cooked it in a fire pit, for sure. So, once again, smoking meat brought to us by Primitive Survival. And that is going to do it for our video on food preservation today. If you learned something, make sure you hit that like button. Also subscribe for all kinds of vintage story content. And a big shout out to the commenter Gonzalo Guerrera for recommending this idea for a tutorial video. If you've got an idea you'd like to see, leave me a comment below and it could turn into a video on the channel. And once again, thank you everyone.